Well, I think the problem is with the marketplace now is that there's lots of pretty good deals. You know, the lottery is all around you. It could be you. You could win this lottery. I think, you know, there's a flight in the UK by Ryanair for a penny. You know, these are incredible deals. So to say it sounds too good to be true, well, the marketplace is full of actually really incredibly too good to be true offers, which are actually true. So it's quite difficult to get that message over. We ask people, stop falling for scams. Oh, good, right, you told me to stop falling, I must stop falling for them. You know, why aren't we getting through? And why do we keep going with it? The question I'm going to try to answer is consumer education, just an easy answer so that government agencies can say they're doing something about it, whilst we fail to do what the public expect, which is to protect them by enforcing the law, putting criminals behind bars. So I'm posing that question. But there is things that work. I think, let's take a look at if we answer that question. What works in consumer awareness? Well, I think that case studies, real people who are victims, brave individuals who get over their embarrassment, who talk about their problem, or loved ones and family and friends, when somebody admits to one of these frauds, and you can recognise it could be someone like you, I think it strikes a chord and it resonates. In the UK, we had one such victim of a romance scam, Brenda Park, and after she went on television, we had 200 other people who came forward. Now, we'd been saying, don't fall for romance scams. I remember every February the 14th, we'd have something run out about don't fall for it, but we never knew how much of a problem it is. It's actually a huge and growing problem. Another thing we found coming to Australia is that I wasn't sure whether it was Brenda Park going on television and now 200 extra victims, or whether it was a real increase. There's a real increase in Australia as well. I think that the criminals know that they've tapped into a brand new way of really exploiting people and making hay at the moment. So we need to strike a chord, we need to make it real, and we need to challenge the public assumption that a victim is stupid and greedy. Because I think if I'd asked people before, in your heart, even if you thought if you wouldn't say it out loud, I think most people think that. We need to challenge that assumption. So we're getting coverage, but the question still is it effective? So I think we need to raise awareness, but with impact. And I think we need a rethink on our mass approach to speaking to consumers. Research has shown us 95% do not fall for scams. Only 5% of people fall for scams. 5% is enough to make 5% of the whole population send off money is enough to make some criminals pretty rich. But we speak to that 100% still. You know, we say to everyone, don't fall for scams. And 95% of people, well, I don't fall for scams. What are you talking to me about? And the 5% think, I'm not the type of person who falls for scams. That's what they think. No one sees themselves as stupid and greedy, do they? So I think that we need a rethink. And the rethink I think is around is we collect victim data. The criminals create what they call sucker lists, these are target lists. Yeah, people they know that who are susceptible to their type of scam. We need to do the same thing and actually talk to those people. In the UK, we got 49,000 people from getting a target list that Boiler Room investment scammers had. We wrote to them individually, and we got people to go around to their houses in where we could. Not all 49,000, unfortunately. So when we do mail interceptions, we used to think, great, we're sending the money back. No, this is a fantastic opportunity to detect who are those people we should be speaking to. And what we need to know our audience. Like business know their audience when they advertise, and like fraudsters do. They know their audience. They don't target everybody all the time. They target specific people. And romance scams, they didn't send a letter to us. They go on Match.com and these type of places where they know there are people who are looking for romance. So I think we need to think carefully about how we target, but also about the messages we deliver and the language we use. So there is a role for helping those self-protect those who can. So there is a role to inform and educate how to spot a scam, and things like ScamWatch over here are a really good example of that. We need to protect those who can't ever respond or recognise our messages. So there are vulnerable, and these can be elderly or they could be young. And how we do this, we engaged with the non-scam majority, targeting carers, targeting those who encounter chronic victims, such as Meals on Wheels and others. And we engage them to assist us to report intelligence, and to support them. What we need to move on to is understanding the triggers of susceptibility to fraud. We need to be smarter in our approach, need to understand who is susceptible, how, why and when people become vulnerable. It was said recently in a conference this week on supporting victims from the Consumer Fraud Task Force that we could all be vulnerable at some stage in our lives. You know, people who respond to romance scams have normally lost a loved one pretty recently or been divorced, and they're going through a period of maybe not trauma, but they're going through a period where they're vulnerable. That's when they're vulnerable to romance scams. So we could talk to them all their lives and they'd never get to it. You need to talk to them in that time with particular messages. So we need to, this research needs to inform communication at the right time when people's circumstances change. So we're doing something called a segmentation research, and this is I think where the academic community can help us in law enforcement and in government to understand more about the victim population. So we're constructing this new approach using a technique of segmentation. This is what advertisers use. So when they know they want to sell someone something, they know everything about those people before. What newspapers they read, where they go for a drink, what they do in their spare time, and so they know how to sell you something very specifically. So we need to divide the population according to common characteristics, but on fraud risk, a fraud risk segmentation. Lots of text in there, but really what this says is that it's important to get an understanding of preferences for communication channels, for example. Overlaying what direct marketing already knows about people, down to streets and postcode areas they know how to target us to sell us stuff. We need to take that and find out which people are vulnerable in which ways and susceptible, and map it over, and then use the same techniques. We're doing research to look at the triggers and susceptibility across the spectrum. So this is about attitudes and behavioural dimensions. And our assumption is, and it's still built on an assumption, is that we can influence these dimensions of attitudes and behaviours and change an individual's vulnerability and susceptibility to fraud. And the first qualitative research we did, and speaking to victims along this, where we identified this spectrum, supports these ideas and the hypothesis that we put forward. We're now deconstructing this susceptibility to fraud around 5 dimensions. This is first of all about awareness of the landscape, those who might be in emotional denial, those who might be aware through specific experience of actually encountering fraud, through their knowledge. Then around knowledge, how do individuals get their knowledge? Is it emotional knowledge? Some people have a gut instinct, so that's how they feel something is just not quite right. And others have a rational knowledge. They read through it and they say, no, I can understand that this is not, this is a scam. So you need to speak to people who are in those things in a different way. So if people think with their gut, then you talk to them in that kind of emotional language. And if they're rational beings, you've got to talk to them in that rational way. So I think it's important to look at knowledge, awareness, behaviours. How do people, their attitudes, so that we understand it. And some of the little boxes here about the things that in our qualitative research people spoke to us about, so we can map this over about people's motivations, lifestyles. Motivations is 4 key areas we've identified. There is a strong risk-taking behaviour amongst a group of people. And with scams and frauds, this kind of comes across things like, it was worth a punt. It's too good. Yeah, it looked too good, but there are really good deals to be had. So there's those people who have a kind of more risk-taking behaviour. Quite a lot around financial reward. Let's face it, it's a social norm to get some money, to be able to, that's a social norm, isn't it? And they exploit that. And the things like the 419 scams, lottery scams, kind of tap into that. Then there's emotional rewards. So a core need to be liked, to be loved, to be recognised, and romance scams I think are particularly good at exploiting that. And then a fear of loss, a real motivation. A driver is a fear of lost opportunity. What if it was true? I could have won $1 million, but I never sent that $25 off. And I think there's a real psychology around loss rather than greed. lost opportunity. So these were the 4 kind of motivators. And unsurprisingly, they are the motivators that scammers exploit. I said a little bit earlier we need to examine how we talk to the victims, and a very useful part of the task force work on victims this week was around bringing people from caring agencies and charities together with law enforcement and government agencies. And they said, we don't talk about victims, we talk about survivors. We don't, because victims is putting people down into a particular descriptor, but survivors is a more positive way. They said that we don't talk about help but assistance because it's collaborative, so it encourages people to work with us to do this. That victims don't want empathy, they want respect, they want to be shown that we don't feel sorry for them. They just want to say, well, we respect what's happened to you. And we needed to challenge these perceptions of the victim being culpable. Putting fraud prevention awareness message in trusted sources at the right time is where this research and segmentation is coming to at the moment. We end up with this quite complicated framework or matrix. So we've built a segmentation around groups of individuals who share the same behaviours based on their current knowledge and awareness of fraud prevention. We map that to the groups who share the same attitudes, motivations, mindset and lifestyles. And then we can design fraud prevention strategies around these groups with similar behaviours, attitudes, motivations, mindsets and lifestyles. So then we can actually target more accurately the type of things we should be saying to those who are most susceptible to the types of frauds. It ends up with a more simple matrix where we provide this kind of cross-cutting universal segmentation with those who are highly susceptible. We need to educate and we need to support them. Those who are at risk, where we need to educate and enable. Those who might be accidentally susceptible, we need to challenge them, remind them, reinforce. And fourthly, those who are consciously non-susceptible. They think, I know I can see this through this, but we need to maintain and keep them up to date with their knowledge so they know the new scams that are around. So what's the end game on this? Mass marketing fraud is like any other business. They're only in it to make profit. If the mail or email is taken out of the system before it reaches the victim, then you reduce the amount of people who can respond. If then another significant number recognise that and do not respond, the issue of awareness and education, you reduce further those who are sending money. Then if we put further barriers in the way and reduce the return on investment in terms of the response and put ourselves between the fraudster, we could get to a tipping point when the return on investment doesn't make it worthwhile. So I think if you think of it that way, you don't have to educate everybody and hope that if you say stop responding to scams, everyone will. You might not be able to intercept and prevent everything coming to someone, but some of that work you do will start reducing the market. And also a next part in terms of the response, stopping the money getting to the criminals. If it gets to that stage, then that return on investment will go away, reduce the profitability, then we can actually beat scams. We can actually win. It could be a strategy to win. But we need to be smarter, determined and persistent, and we need all elements of that strategy. My main message then is that a combined strategy is needed with all those elements of prevention and disruption, enforcement, consumer awareness and prevention. But we can't rely on the question I posed, was it a fig leaf or panacea? Well, I think you think that it's neither. We can't rely on consumer awareness alone to defeat fraud. So it's not a panacea. It's not what we should put all our eggs in that basket. But it does have an important part to play in building our response. But we do need to improve our response, be smarter and more targeted in the audience that we engage with. We need to be more ambitious and more innovative and less risk-averse in disruption tactics. We need to up our games in terms of cross-border enforcement. And we need to ensure that the tools are there for law enforcement officers to up the risk to these guys. Together, these elements will mean that we can reduce the harm from mass marketing fraud. And I think all the people in this room, academics, criminologists, law enforcement officers, consumer protection agencies, can all play a part in helping us to defeat mass marketing fraud. Thank you.